Autumn garden cleanup is well and truly underway here in the home garden, and I've been working really hard at clearing out some of the beds, including the squash bed. So I harvested all of the squash and pumpkins. They're curing right now alongside the greenhouse, and I replanted that bed up with some spring cabbage. I've been clearing other containers and beds and clearing out the greenhouse a bit, and basically trying to start preparing my garden and plants for the colder months to come. Now, a lot of the plants that are perennials that I grow will survive our mild winters here. It doesn't really get below freezing, and when it does, it's not for any prolonged period of time. But there are plants that I grow that will not survive being outside over the winter. Chilies, for example, tomatoes, and also this plant, which is the Cape gooseberry, also known as the ground cherry, or Physalis is its official botanical name. And it's a relative of the tomato. And if it gets really cold, it will basically die down. And it's really hard to get going here because you have to start seed really early, so alongside tomatoes, and it has a very long growing period, and it's only now starting to fruit. So one way that I can give it a head start and also ensure that it will survive the winter is to take cuttings now and then grow them on in the house or in some place that's warmer and more protected than an unheated greenhouse. This plant started its life at our annual seed swap last year. So that was about a year and a half ago, or even a little bit longer. And I initially grew it on and then planted it out in the allotments. And then last winter, I dug it up, brought it home, made sure that there were no New Zealand flatworms or eggs. And then I overwintered it in the greenhouse. And if you cut the plant down to just about a third of its growth, it can overwinter that way and survive. Now, it creates these little lanterns, and you might have seen them before. There's a couple of plants that look similar to this. This one isn't quite ready, but these down here, they are. So when they become brown and papery like this, you can pick them, and inside them is a kind of a orange berry. And it's quite an unusual flavor. It's quite a treat. This is really interesting. One of the lanterns fell to the ground, so it was just sitting on the soil, and you can see the berry inside is gone, but the seeds are still there. And what I realized is that if it's on the table and a little bit of wind comes by, it does this. So I imagine that this is one of the ways that the plant naturally propagates itself and colonizes new ground. Propagating plants from stem cuttings is really very simple, and it's a very cheap way to create a lot more plants for free, and also to make sure that they survive and you've got them the next year. And all it involves is taking a section of stem from a plant, cutting it into sections, and in the case of Cape gooseberry, it's going to be about 4 inches long, 4 to 5 inches long. You put it into a growing medium and allow it to grow its own roots, and it wants to grow roots. And you can use that same method for tomatoes as well. Now, tomatoes and Physalis, they're relatively easy to grow from seed. They're just a bit fiddly. You've got to start them off in winter so that they have that long growing period. But stem cuttings is even easier than starting from seed, and it's just an alternative way of creating a lot more plants. When you're taking sections of stem to propagate, you don't take the older, thicker type wood that's down here at the base, and you don't use the tips either. You use these kind of mid-sections of stems. And what I'm gonna do is, I think that's a good one, or maybe this one down here. Yes, I'll take this one. I'm just gonna use my snips and cut there. And I've cut just below a leaf, and it's generally here at these leaf nodes that a lot of roots will start forming. But in the case of Physalis and also tomatoes, all of those little hairy bits along the stems will become roots as well. So it really takes to growing its own roots. Now you only need a few pieces of kit to propagate your own stem cuttings. And although I took this section of plant with my snips, I'm going to put them aside because the blades of scissors actually press the edges of the plant stem together. And with Physalis, it's quite thick, so it's not as much of a big deal. But with rosemary and lavender, it can close the cuttings so that it's not able to pull up moisture. So instead, we use a blade, and you can use a garden blade or a kitchen knife. Just make sure that it's sterile and that you have a very clean cutting surface. Now, other things that I have in front of me are a piece of bamboo, and I'm going to be using this as a dibber. And although I tend to use terracotta pots for propagating, I'm just going to use an ordinary plastic pot this time. And I have just a little plate for it to sit on because this is going to go inside. I have a mixture of houseplant potting mix and vermiculite, or not vermiculite, perlite. And it's about 3 parts the potting mix and 1 part the perlite. And the perlite adds a lot of drainage, and so it makes sure that the cuttings aren't sitting in a wet mess inside this pot. Now for the cutting. We are aiming to have sections that are about 10 centimeters long, so about 4 inches, and to end with a leaf node there. I'm just going to trim this just so that it's a fresh cut. I'm going to trim that leaf off, and so I would say that's about 4 inches, and it's right there below a leaf node, and I'm just going to make a diagonal cut right there. So that right there is a cutting. Even though the leaves are about halfway down, that's fine. This one looks a little bit less desirable. It's got a spider living in it, so let's cut this one off. That one can stay outside with mommy's spider. And this cutting only needs that 1 leaf to survive. So I'm going to cut up the rest of this plant, and I think I can get a good few sections. You can also use your fingernails to pinch off any of the extra leaves or sometimes flowers or flower buds. So after all of that, I've got 5 sections that I can pot up now. And so the next step is filling the pot here with a bit of compost, poking some holes in it along the side, and then planting these stem cuttings. With this filled, I'm going to use the bamboo skewer to create a little hole there at the side, and that's just to guide the stem cutting down. And I'm putting it at the side as well because these guys need better drainage, and the sides of a pot are drier than the center. So I'm going to pull that out now. And then the cutting goes down inside the hole. And you have to remember what side of the stem was on the lower side, so on the bottom, and what side was top, because you can't get those mixed up. So I've got that first cutting in, and now I'm going to make space for, how many more do I have? I've got 4 more cuttings, so 4 more holes just along the side here, and get these potted up. All sorted. So now I'm going to put them on the plate, give them a good watering in, just to make sure that all the potting mix is moist, but not sopping. And I'm going to place these inside in a window that gets bright light, but not direct light all day. So I'm not going to put this in a south-facing window. I'm going to put this in my office. It's west-facing, and it'll be perfect for these cuttings. And within a couple of weeks, they'll start forming roots, even if I can't see them initially. Eventually, they will start coming out the bottom holes, and I can either overwinter them in here, or if they're getting too big, I can separate them out into their own pots and then grow them on until spring. Now, hopefully, these cuttings, when they start growing, they won't get to this size in the house before spring. They won't, though. They'll stay relatively small, and as I said, I might pot them up individually, or they might actually just stay in this pot all the way until late winter, early spring. And I've actually also reconsidered the placing of these, because putting them in my office means that they're too close to where Maggie likes to sleep and hang out. And she has taken a liking to destroying plants. So this is going to go in the porch with the other house plants. Well, I don't know if you have Physalis, but if you do and you're interested in propagating and bringing them into the next year as stem cuttings, I hope that this tutorial has been really informative and that you're able to replicate this as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now. One last thing before you go. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to Lovely Greens and click that little bell icon so that you get notifications for when new videos are out.